Willkommen zur 14. Ausgabe von Digitale Optimisten. Ich bin Alex und ich interviewe in diesem Podcast die spannendsten Gründerpersönlichkeiten aus dem Silicon Valley. Immer auf der Suche nach dem nächsten großen Ding. Aber mein Podcast heißt auch Perspektiven aus dem Silicon Valley. Und genau so eine will ich dir heute in dieser Folge präsentieren. Als ich Anfang 2018 auf der Suche nach einer Wohnung in San Francisco war, hat mich fast der Schlag getroffen. Denn die Preise astronomisch zu nennen, ist wirklich eine Untertreibung. Am Ende habe ich für eine etwa 70 Quadratmeter große Wohnung unfassbare $4.500 gezahlt. Das sind ungefähr 4.000 Euro pro Monat und das sogar ohne Nebenkosten. Wie kann das so unglaublich teuer sein? Die Antwort ist Angebot und Nachfrage. Das Angebot bleibt relativ konstant, während die Nachfrage durch immer mehr gut bezahlte Tech-Mitarbeiter steigt. Gleichzeitig bleiben viele ganz normale Jobs auf der Strecke. Wie soll sich ein Kassierer oder eine Polizistin diese Preise überhaupt noch leisten können? Aus meiner Sicht ist es auch ein Faktor für die Unruhen, die wir in den letzten Wochen gesehen haben. Meine Gesprächspartnerin diese Woche ist keine Gründerin, hat aber eine mindestens genauso aufregende, wahrscheinlich sogar viel größere und schwierigere Aufgabe. Sie heißt Kate Hartley, ist Direktorin der städtischen Behörde von San Francisco und hat genau die Aufgabe, um die sie keiner beneidet, nämlich die Mieten in dieser verrückten Stadt irgendwie bezahlbar zu halten. Das Interessante an dieser Folge ist, dass ich das Gespräch schon vor ein paar Monaten aufgenommen habe, bevor die Corona-Krise einen senkenden Effekt auf die Mietpreise in der Stadt hatte. Du wirst hören, dass wir über den dämpfenden Effekt einer möglichen Rezession reden, ohne dass wir natürlich wussten, dass es genauso kommen würde. Ich habe Kate aber auch letzte Woche noch einmal erreicht und sie hat mir gesagt, was die Corona-Krise für einen Effekt auf die Lage am Immobilienmarkt hat. Und übrigens, eine ähnliche Wohnung, für die ich vor 2 Jahren noch $4.500 gezahlt habe, kostet jetzt nach der akuten Corona-Zeit nur noch $3.700. Bevor es losgeht mit dem Podcast, meine Bitte an dich. Bitte erzähle einer weiteren Person in dieser Woche von diesem Podcast. Der Podcast wächst wirklich schnell und ich freue mich sehr, wenn mehr Menschen diese Geschichten aus dem Silicon Valley hören. Mehr Infos wie immer auf digitaleoptimisten.de und jetzt viel Spaß mit Kate Hartley. Well, hi Kate.
Hi Alex.
Very happy to be here. I sit here in the Mayor's Office of Housing Development. Is that right?
Yes, the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development.
Awesome. And I sit here with a very special guest, Kate Hartley. We briefly met at a community meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I thought I have to interview you for my podcast. Maybe we can start our listeners off with just a brief intro into who you are and what you do here in the city.
Well, I'm the director of the office. It's my job to get affordable housing built in San Francisco and also to deliver essential community services to all San Franciscans, like job training and educational assistance, assistance to victims of domestic violence, a whole range. So we are an office of about 100 people, and we are out there loaning money and putting money out to community-based nonprofits to get this work done. We have a portfolio of about 25,000 affordable housing units now, and we've got a very strong pipeline of about 5,000 units that will open soon or start construction soon. So we're really working hard to address the city's housing needs.
Got it. Getting people into affordable housing. That's the one sentence pitch, I guess, we can take on. That is interesting. I've been living here for a bit shy of a year. So I know a bit what it's like living in the city. Maybe you can share your story, how you came to this position, and maybe also how you found the passion to focus so much attention to this particular issue.
Well, I came here somewhat circuitously. I arrived in San Francisco in the 80s with a broken heart and no money, and San Francisco really welcomed me, and I fell in love with the city. I went off to graduate school in Berkeley and was studying legal history, but my program allowed me to study other fields and other disciplines all around the campus. And I wandered into the Department of Urban Planning and really was enlightened and fell in love with the study of how we can make cities great places, better places. So I quit my doctoral program and took a job as a file clerk for a market rate housing developer in San Francisco who was converting old warehouses to residential living. And one thing led to another. I got a job moonlighting, working for a battered women's shelter who needed a new home, a new building for their shelter. And that was the launch of my career in affordable housing. So I've been doing this for about 25 years in the private sector, in the public sector. And I really have so valued my time in the public sector because I think that we need good government, and we need government to help address these issues very well, but also working closely with the private sector.
Wow. So you quit your doctorate program to spread good, huh? to tackle the big issues.
My parents will be glad to have me report I did get my master's degree.
There we go. Okay. So I love happy endings.
Yes.
So that's great. So maybe you can share, where do you live yourself, actually?
I live in Oakland, which is across the bay. I moved to the East Bay to go to graduate school, and never found my way back, although I've always worked in San Francisco. And one thing that I think San Franciscans and others in the Bay Area have to do to address our housing needs is really to think more regionally. So Oakland is the equivalent, for those who've been there, of Brooklyn to New York's Manhattan. It's a great city and easy commuting distance to downtown San Francisco.
So you touched a bit on your job, your objectives. Maybe can you give us a scope of the challenges or the housing situation in general that it's like in San Francisco?
Sure. San Francisco has a population of about 890,000 people. We have about 390,000 dwelling units, and only about 25,000 of those are technically affordable. And that is that they're publicly subsidized, like Europe's social housing. Mm-hmm. We do have rent control, though, and about 175,000 of our apartments do have rent control. But it's an imperfect system, and that is that if an owner wants to get out of the rent-controlled housing business, they can, just with an eviction notice to tenants. And then after waiting a short period, they can convert their building to a different form of tenancy, a tenants in common. It's sort of limited equity ownership. In addition, owners can move in to their buildings. Of course, that's a rational and reasonable thing. But that means that tenants get evicted. And also, when a tenant moves out, and this is one of the elements of our rent control that creates a very negative pressure, the building owner can reset the rent, which may be very, very low, to market rate. Mm. So after the Great Recession faded away and in recovery, San Francisco went through tremendous change, and we're still going through it. So in 2011, our unemployment rate was about 10%. It's less than 2% now. Mm. And we had rapid job growth. And unfortunately, San Francisco and the Bay Area has always had very low housing production. There are many vested interests here, people who have views and have nice large plots of land where their housing sits, and low density, and they want to preserve that. And so we've created a regulatory climate that makes it hard to build housing. Mm-hmm. And it's been hard to build housing for decades. So the recession's over. There's massive job growth, especially in the tech sector. And so many people are coming to the Bay Area, coming to San Francisco and saying, God, we love this city. We want to be here. And there's just not enough housing to accommodate that growth. So we have what we refer to as, very in a self-explanatory way, extreme jobs housing imbalance. In San Francisco alone, since 2009, we've added 165,000 jobs and 32,000 housing units. So it's pretty extreme. What's also happening is that much of the job growth is higher income. And that means that higher income households are coming to the city, and they're able, because of the way our rent control works, to apply, not intentionally, of course, but there's an application of pressure to get longer-term, lower-income tenants out who pay low rents, and then the landlord can jack up the rents, and new residents who don't have a problem paying high rents can move in. So it's been a difficult cycle.
So I guess, in a situation where high paid tech workers come into the city, then a landlord does not have any incentive to have a rent-controlled apartment, right? Because they would be able to, if they would evict people, they would be able to charge a constantly increasing market rate. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
That's right. The other thing that we really struggle with is that while San Francisco has a strong political will to build affordable housing and a wealth of resources to do so, even though we're not doing enough, we still have strong programs to try to address these problems. Other Bay Area cities have no interest in building multifamily housing, in building more densely, in providing the housing needed for this new workforce. So Silicon Valley, South Bay, the East Bay, towns like Palo Alto, Mountain View, Menlo Park, Lafayette, Pleasanton, all the places where jobs are happening, there are disincentives and outright prohibitions to build the apartment buildings that we really need to move equitably into this new cycle of economic growth. So
it's the NIMBY thing, right? Not in my backyard.
Yes, it is a NIMBY phenomenon, and the extreme demonstration of income inequality that is really having terribly adverse effects. And homelessness is one of them.
Let me maybe, for our German listeners, let's get a bit into perspective. I took a look at, there is obviously a lot of reports on housing in SF. And so I researched the median rent for a one-bedroom apartment, which is about $3,700. I learned that the median sale for a two-bedroom apartment, so the price whenever someone sales, has increased by 330%. That's what I heard. Berlin is around 100%. So you can see that what you mentioned, the influx of talent and the success of the companies has led to a challenging situation on the housing market. But the number that I cited, the plus 330%, that made me curious, because there's a lot of fluctuations in these numbers, right? I saw you mentioned after the recession there was quite a dip in the cost of an apartment, in the sale of an apartment. So why is it so volatile? This is something that in German market, I think it's they tend to be a lot more stable. And I'm wondering, maybe why is that such a big fluctuation in these sale prices?
Well, since 2014, we haven't really seen a huge fluctuation in rents or sales prices. We have had steady income growth since 2014, that is average median income of households who live here. And we have had strong increases in the cost to rent. around 2016, we saw a flattening of the amount of rent increases every year. And we do attribute that to what was a brief building boom in 2014, 15, and 16. So we added to supply. The sales price of a home in San Francisco, at least, has creeped up pretty steadily. So I think that economists say that we're due for another recession anytime soon. They've been saying that for 3 years or so. And if and when we have that economic down cycle, we would expect to see rents drop pretty steadily. And the elimination of jobs and higher unemployment, of course. But we haven't. What's been a little difficult for us is that since 2014, rents spiked, flattened, but have maintained this high rate. Single-family home and condo purchase prices have crept up steadily and significantly, and the cost of construction has not stopped increasing since 2014. So the incentive for the ability for developers to build new housing, which we need, has really diminished because it's so expensive to build here.
Got it. So I guess that's probably where you come in as a governmental agency to step up building new apartments when the private sector maybe not be able to keep up the pace as costs increase.
It's a hard job because what's really driving our cost of construction increases is that the construction industry was really decimated in the recession, and it hasn't quite recovered, and we have a severe shortage of skilled construction labor. And now we also have a graying of the construction industry. So really to
people getting older?
Yes, people getting older, and the construction industry having a hard time attracting young talent. So now if you are on a construction site and you're building a high-rise and you're an electrician, you should have a college degree, and ideally a degree in electrical engineering. Well, it's hard to sell a young person coming out of college with a great degree to go into the construction field when they may be able to make twice as much as an entry-level person in tech. Right?
So that's super interesting. It's almost like a vicious cycle. As rent prices increase, it gets harder for people to live, harder to attract talent for construction companies. So the supply goes down and everything the cycle continues.
It's really true. We are in a terrible vicious cycle right now. In fact, to finish a lot of the big jobs that we've had, Salesforce Tower, and we just are finishing up a new basketball arena for your listeners who follow the Golden State Warriors. They're coming in. Companies actually had to bring in workers from out of state and put them up in hotel rooms.
Wow. Because
we didn't have the skilled labor here. So you can imagine what that does to the cost of construction. It's been really difficult. And it used to be, some of the old timers that I work with, the construction guys, talk about, back in the day when they'd be on a job and they'd be working with their father, their brother, their nephew, and their son. That really doesn't happen anymore. It's grandpa and maybe dad. But the sons and certainly the daughters are not really going into this industry.
So maybe to condense what you said, the overheating of the job market here, and so many people, including me, coming here from other countries, working here, has led to an overheating on the housing market as well. So would you say, and this might be a bit black and white, but the best thing that could happen to the housing situation would be, we don't want a recession, right? But would be a cooling down of the job market here in the area?
It's a really difficult and complex proposition. I think that when you look at the jobs housing imbalance, you certainly would say that perhaps a cooling off would help. On the other hand, we of course, want a strong economy. We want the Bay Area and San Francisco to be a place where there's great opportunity. A 1.9% unemployment rate is really tremendous. But what we don't have is equitable growth. And so if we had these strong economic conditions, but we had the companies that are creating these amazing new jobs, taking responsibility for building the housing that their workers need. And so those workers aren't pushing out lower income residents in existing housing, that would make a difference. If we had different tax structures that required companies to pay more of their fair share to take care of these externalities, that would make a difference. If we had regulatory systems and regulatory protocols where it wasn't so very difficult to build an apartment building, and like in San Francisco, one person who just doesn't like the building and can make a claim that their view is impeded or there's a small little shadow on a park, they can stop that building. And that has led to the situation that San Francisco is the most expensive place to build in the world. And that came out this year in the Turner and Townsend International Construction Report for 2019. So it's nothing to be proud of to be the most expensive place to build in the world. So there are ways that we could maintain that strong economic base and welcome people here with all their talent and all that opportunity and that innovation, and house our people properly. It's doable, and we just haven't done a good job of implementing those structural changes.
So your job must be fascinating because, well, you're basically tasked to build these housing, these apartments, in an area where, you mentioned the NIMBY phenomenon before, where people might not be super willing to accept a new building somewhere. So there must have been a lot of interesting things happening over time, you dealing with maybe tenants or people, not wanting something. Can you share more, maybe a story or something that happened along those lines?
Sure. We recently, in the last year, were attempting to sponsor housing for low-income seniors in one of the San Francisco's most Tony or affluent neighborhoods. And it's a neighborhood that has not seen any affordable housing development. There's parts of the neighborhood that have beautiful multi-million-dollar single-family homes, a community center that was designed by one of our star Bay Area architects, Julia Morgan. It's spectacular, and you can park anywhere on the street, and you don't have to search for hours looking for parking. It's amazing. Anyway, we weren't going to build in that enclave, but we were going to build down the road on a busy road, actually. Anyway, it was for low-income seniors. These are people who've worked their whole lives. The rent was still about $800 or $900 a month, which requires some sort of pension or some sort of income. And the neighborhood really came out in droves, and were making demands on us, such as, how are you need to come up with a compensation plan for when your residents molest our children. And, those sorts of ideas that people with low incomes, people who've worked all their lives, who just want a decent place to live in their retirement, are all child molesters is very difficult, very troubling.
So how does that play out? I mean, now you're in a situation where you want to do something good, right? But people say, no, not here, maybe somewhere else. How does that get resolved?
It's a very difficult process, and I'm sad to report that we ended up abandoning that project, not because of the opposition. We were more than willing to take on the fight. And I believe that if it were only that, we would have prevailed. But the site was the home of a church that was built in the 50s and had a very nice stained glass window as part of its design. And our planning department determined that it was potentially a historic resource. And then we realized that because of the location, there was some structural issues for a home above, and that if we were to do our building, then it could have created some issues with that hillside. And so between the neighborhood opposition, the geotechnical issues, the historic resource issues, and knowing that the neighbors would take us through a prolonged legal battle, we decided that sometimes you just got to cut your losses, and we walked away. So that is not a process that's unknown to us. It's a difficult effort.
But I can tell you, Kate, so although this didn't work out well, in Germany there's, after we decided to not use atomic power anymore, nuclear power anymore, we built a lot of, what's it called, the things you put in the landscape that turn around, that produce wind energy?
The windmills?
The windmills, there
Yes.
we go, yes, the windmills. So there's also a lot of NIMBY-ness in Germany, saying, well, it's a nuisance,
Right.
It's not good for your health. So we have that there too. But
I'm glad we're not alone.
No, totally not. I do want to. You touched on one interesting thing is the role that tech plays, and I want to talk about two different things. Number one is the big tech companies, and I would love to know how you work with them. And the other thing that I want to talk about is the startups. So I think everyone is trying to build the next big thing, solve all the problems that people might have. Now it's basically how do I get my laundry done, but maybe it could be also how do I find affordable living. So there must be a lot of energy also around this problem. But let's start with the first side of things, with the tech companies. I know that Google mentioned or made public that it's going to invest $1 billion in housing. I'm pretty sure other companies might have different similar things. But how do you work together with these companies? Are you trying to involve them in the products, in the problems, so they internalize these issues?
Yes, it is really important, and it's really difficult. I've been here 5 years. We have had multiple connections with tech companies like Google over the years, multiple explorations of opportunity for shared resources and trying to address these problems together. We have not, except for some investments by Google in San Francisco, but on the margins of what we do here at the Mayor's Office of Housing, there hasn't been yet that really solid partnership established, and the resources and the partnership that we have received we're very, very happy about. And it's not to say that there's not been good work done and that we can't do more. Salesforce, for example, with Mark Benioff, he's really been a leader on issues of homelessness. He's been incredibly generous. But the problem is so big, and tech companies are right there in the middle. And I think that there are some old ways of thinking that are still happening, which are prohibiting movement towards a more equitable community and a stronger economy. Mm-hmm. I mean, nobody's going to benefit if we have this, what we call the barbell society, where you have a lot of very rich people, nobody in the middle living here anymore, and a lot of super poor people at the other end. So Google's $1 billion is a fantastic announcement, but remember that $750 million of the $1 billion is the appraised value of land that Google has acquired over the years that it will rezone and devote to housing. It wants to build 15,000 housing units. And that is great. But that leaves $250 million to invest in affordable housing. And given the costs of construction, that actually doesn't go very far. And so the $1 billion is somewhat misleading when you're thinking, as I do, in terms of we have 9,000 homeless people. We need housing for all 9,000. We have 20,000 people who every year cycle in and out of homelessness because their housing's so unstable. We need housing for them. We have done a terrible job of providing affordable middle-income housing. People, regular old people like public sector workers and bus drivers and teachers and firefighters. So we need to do something differently. And all the tech companies have the capacity to really make significant change, but because of our tax structure, because of fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, because of the ability to sort of push responsibility for these social problems onto government, we just haven't quite got there to a place where anybody is making a difference. And I think that really needs to change for the benefit of these companies too, because the ability to attract and retain talent is at risk. The instability of the communities, if you've got people with nothing, the rise in homelessness, which is making headlines every single day. I mean, we're going down a path that's very dangerous.
So if these companies would get more involved, what would be the best thing that could happen in partnership with your office? Is it money? Is it building houses directly, not only for high-paid employees, but also for a socially diverse group? Or what else could there be to solve the issue?
I think there's some really straightforward things. I think companies taking on the responsibility to build housing for their employees in their communities is a great start. We have terrible traffic congestion in the Bay Area, and that's because we have these long commutes for people who can't afford to live near their jobs. So that would be the first thing. And I do applaud Google for starting there. And also we need that construction to be for all employees. It's from high-end employees, of course, but although they have all options, but also to the administrative assistants, to janitors, to clerks, and people who are not making high incomes. They need affordable housing near their jobs. There are many companies who do a fantastic job of legally avoiding paying taxes. And that really impedes government's ability to take care of problems that the private sector can't and shouldn't take care of. For example, if you have a senior citizen who only makes $1,000 a month in Social Security payments and is trying to afford that one-bedroom apartment that you mentioned that costs $3,500 a month, that's government's role to provide a subsidy or affordable housing for that senior citizen. But if we have a tax base that is diminished because amazingly creative and smart lawyers and accountants have figured out how to get out of paying taxes, then we can't solve the problem. So those two things would make a huge difference.
And one more tech company that I want to talk about, because in Paris and Berlin there were a couple of initiatives against Airbnb who also affect the supply of regular housing. Has that also been, with regard to Airbnb starting up here in San Francisco, has that also been an issue here? and maybe how have you dealt with it?
Yeah, Airbnb has been very controversial here in its birthplace, San Francisco. People love it, hate it, love to hate it, love to love it. This is a great example of where balance can come through and really, preserve the good of a company like Airbnb. I'm a user of Airbnb, and I've had such amazing experiences. But there's also research that shows that any place where Airbnb is operating, you see an incremental increase in rents. And so that we have to take that seriously. So in San Francisco, legislation was passed, and we've worked with Airbnb to regulate the use of Airbnb so that we could diminish the loss of rental units and just places for people to live. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's going pretty well. Airbnb allows some people to stay in the city because they can put their apartment up for the maximum number of days allowed and make a little money, and it helps with their income. So those are the kind of approaches where you have balance. Like I disagree with the idea that Airbnb shouldn't operate in a place like San Francisco. It's but it does have a demonstrated impact on affordability.
So I'm wondering, and the answer might be straight out no, but circling back to the startups, and there are startups out here that focus on the smallest need, getting your groceries delivered, right, taking care of your laundry, basically everything. But are there any innovative startups that have identified this as a huge issue and are trying to find innovative ways of providing housing for people? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, let's see. I think you and your listeners will be shocked to learn that it was just a couple of years ago that for our lottery process, for our affordable housing, we just moved it online. It was paper, just like a couple of years ago. It's kind of embarrassing to tell. It's completely revolutionized the way we work. It's so easy to apply for affordable housing now. You can do it from your phone. You can apply for every opportunity. You don't have to stand in line anywhere. So there are definitely ways that we're getting more efficient. In terms of startups, there's a few new ideas happening. There's people who are trying to connect senior citizens who live in large homes. Their children have moved on, and they have spare bedrooms that aren't being used. They're having a hard time paying their mortgage or paying their taxes, and they can rent the rooms out to individuals who are looking for housing. So we have some startups sort of trying to figure out how to connect people better with those opportunities. Those, I think, are effective on the margin. It's not going to really make a huge impact on our housing needs. There are people doing some interesting work technologically in trying to make housing construction more efficient and producing modular housing and creating better efficiencies in the whole building process. And that's really the promising area for our housing needs. We have to use technologies that allow us to build a 100-unit building that can withstand a major earthquake here in San Francisco and last for 100 years. So, there's a lot of startups now that are looking at building small homes very quickly and
tiny
efficiently.
Homes.
Yeah. That's not it yet. But as that technology advances, it could really help to address our housing if we can bring construction costs down and speed up the time of delivery for our housing.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I'm always it's logical, but I'm always astonished by the fact that it's supply and demand, right? How can we get up supply? How can we maybe match the supply to the demand? So it's interesting to see these companies doing exactly that, trying to jack up the supply of affordable housing and on the demand side, matching folks who have a home to people that are looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to focus now on maybe on a very European take. So in Denmark, in Germany, and all over the world, there are regions that want to be the next Silicon Valley, right? People look at Silicon Valley with a sense of wonder and maybe envy because, well, it's impressive just the amount of billion-dollar companies that have been created here. Imagine you were a city in Germany or anywhere in Europe that we're going to be the next Silicon Valley, right? And now we know that amazing opportunity, but also some challenges down the road, especially in the housing sector. What kind of advice would you give to these cities that are so focused on emulating what we've seen here?
Yeah, I really value the innovation, the creativity, the free-spiritedness of the entrepreneurs who have come here over many decades, who are still coming to the Bay Area and doing amazing things. But one thing that is really killing us is income inequality. Mm-hmm. And the rapid advancement of a group of people who strike it rich and have astronomical incomes, and then the effects on all the people kind of left behind. Mm-hmm. And that is something we struggle with every single day. And if there is a way to pursue that opportunity, that innovation and creativity, while also building in a more equitable distribution of the resources, then that seems to me really the goal, the
sweet
perfect
spot. Mm-hmm.
Perfect outcome. I mean, this is sort of cliche to say, but it does seem that, when you're paying CEOs, $100 million bonuses on top of their many hundreds of $1 million salaries, and you're paying your janitor $30,000, and that janitor has to drive 2 hours to come to work, that something could give there, that there's some ability to balance that out a little bit. And that if that were the case here, I think a lot of the things that are have become so difficult about living in San Francisco would be mitigated. So Europe, of course, has many cities in Europe, countries in Europe, provide a much better social safety net than we do in the U.S. And I think preservation and bolstering of that safety net while promoting innovation is really the key to success.
So that's a hopeful message to our German listeners, because I know that a lot of people, I think it's a case of the grass is always greener on the other side. But talking about Germany and Europe in general, and Europe and Germany in particular, I want to give you a bit of a perspective on what is being discussed in Germany at the moment. Maybe before I do that, I can give you some more data on what the situation is like in Germany at the moment. So let's take Munich, one of the most expensive cities in Germany. And this is square meter, right? This is not square foot. So the cost per square meter in Munich is around $19 or €16.50. There was a 70% increase in since I think 2004. This cost in square meter in San Francisco, because it's a bit different. We calculate with bedrooms, not with square meters or square feet, but it's around $50, and there's quite an increase, far above the 70%. So to target that kind of upcoming overheating of the German housing market, one is the Mietpreisbremse, which basically says you want to limit the amount of increase that is allowed per unit. In areas where the housing market is tight, rents can only be increased to a level of 10% above the average rent in that area. Seems like a similar concept to what you have with rent control.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that in certain economic conditions where you have really tight housing supply, you have a good proportion of your population that has a fixed income or wages that are not going to be going up anytime soon at any, rapid rate, that sort of price control makes a lot of sense. And as a former developer of housing, I know that when you are an owner, a developer, and you go into putting your financing together, that you make projections that should be realistic, and you're only going to project a certain increase in rents over time because you don't want to be overly optimistic. It's too risky. So I think capping rents or capping prices at that still allow for that fair industry return that's modest and reasonable makes sense, because we know that owners and developers can still make a return. You're not going to kill the incentive to build, the incentive to produce more housing, which we need, but you're still going to protect people in their homes. The corollary to that is that for households that really are on a fixed income, like a senior citizen, for example, who only has a set amount of money and is not going to be able to accommodate, say, a 3 or 4 or 5% per year increase in cost, then the government can step in and provide some subsidies to that very vulnerable population. But I think that makes perfect sense, and I think it's reasonable and doable.
So let's turn up the notch a bit, right? So we have that already here. The next one is called Mietpreisdeckel, which literally translates to a cap of the rental costs. And I think Berlin did just that. They capped the rent increases altogether for 5 years. Mm-hmm. So translating, you can't increase the rent for the next 5 years. What do you think about that?
Well, it's obviously more tricky because you also have operating expenses that the owner of a building needs to cover. And so when you've said to the owner, you are going to have to absorb the increase, the inflation of your operating expenses without any compensation for that, then it starts to erode the quality of housing. Mm-hmm. And I think a 5-year cap is not going to change anybody's economics too much, especially if it follows a period where there were rapid rent increases over time. And so I think that a kind of cooling off period for 5 years is can be very reasonable depending on the circumstances. But I think that in cities, and we see this in many years in San Francisco, where the allowable rent increase is far less than what the inflation for operating expenses is. The results we see are displacement pressures, buildings that are abandoned, buildings are sort of physically by the landlords and owners, buildings with terrible deferred maintenance needs because the landlords stop investing in repairs. So it's delicate, and again, it's trying to, if at all possible, achieve this balance with giving the landlord what they need to operate the building reasonably, protecting tenants, and then government stepping in to protect the very vulnerable tenants.
There might also be an adverse effect on the willingness of private investors to build, right?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. So let's turn up the dial now to maximum, I guess. And this is a very controversial statement. This is not mainstream at the moment as we speak. But there has been, and this is now a very difficult word for me, there has been some politicians calling for expropriation without compensation, meaning that Enteignung in German, which means that some large real estate companies should be expropriated, and the state should take control of these apartments again. What's your take on that?
Wow. You know, I think that I could see making a very good argument against a bad actor, a really bad actor who has, over the years, kicked little old ladies out on the street and raised rents mercilessly and put children out, that sort of thing. That sort of rampant abuse of housing stock, which is so essential to good governance, to a strong economy, to a well-functioning community, that should not stand. So I think if you had those bad actors and you wanted to take strong action against them, then I could see making that case. However, a blanket expropriation and lack of compensation, I think, also, of course, has the potential for really upsetting the market, the overall structure pretty terribly. And we need investors, we need lenders, we need people to build these buildings. It's a high-risk venture. A fair return is not unreasonable given those things, especially when it's important that you have someone who's taking responsibility for the maintenance of the building, the safety of the building, the long-term operating integrity of the building. I mean, I could see in San Francisco if our city government were to all of a sudden inherit or take over apartment buildings around the city, our ability to really deliver good quality housing would be very limited, just by sort of bureaucratic obstacles. So I think the ability to punish really bad actors, but also preserve a public-private partnership where you have lenders and investors making a reasonable return, and then the government being able to protect vulnerable populations is a better approach.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you, Kate, so much for this interview. I think we learned a ton of how you approach your job, how you approach the situation, this very unique part of the world, the challenges that San Francisco has, and also the amazing opportunity of the talent that's coming here, the ideas that are being created.
It was really a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Das war das Gespräch mit Kate Hartley, das ich vor der Corona-Krise geführt habe. Ein bisschen fühlt es sich an wie eine Zeitreise zurück in eine, unschuldige Zeit, wenn man sich anschaut, was in den letzten Monaten vor allem in den USA passiert ist. Jetzt machen wir den Sprung in die Gegenwart und Kate erzählt uns, wie San Francisco durch den Tornado kommt, der 2020 bisher war. Und ich kann sagen, es hört sich ziemlich traurig an, aber es gibt auch einen kleinen Schimmer Hoffnung.
Hi, Alexander. It's Kate Hartley calling, and thank you for the how-to on sending this voicemail message. I suspect I'm going to be using this trick for a while now. Okay, so question number one regarding how the city of San Francisco has dealt with COVID and its effects on housing, and especially the problems of homelessness. So as we've talked about, the goals of providing more affordable housing and then just keeping people safe from COVID transmission got tremendously difficult starting in mid-March in San Francisco, like every other place experiencing COVID. Right away, there was a need to secure rooms for sheltering in place, for quarantining. But because of COVID's transmittability, that effort was quite complicated. Staffing remains difficult. Funding is really difficult. Just getting people to agree to go into hotel rooms or SROs has been surprisingly difficult. The city's Tenderloin neighborhood, for example, really spiraled into misery, a kind of dystopic place of tents and suffering. However, as we speak, the city is embarking on an effort to get 300 people out of tents in the Tenderloin and into hotel rooms. This is on top of about 1,000 people who've already occupied hotel rooms. It's a really complicated process, but it will keep happening one tenant at a time. And then the city is really intent on converting as many of those hotel rooms and motel rooms and SRO rooms from shelter-in-place housing to permanent affordable housing. So we're hopeful that it will really make a difference. Question number 2 was how has the San Francisco housing situation changed since the last year or over the last year, and are there new opportunities that are coming out of this crisis? And what we're seeing is a pretty big drop in rents right now, about 10%. We're seeing that market rate landlords are offering price reductions and incentives like 2 months of free rent to get new tenants into their buildings. We're seeing hotel and motel owners who are trying to figure out if there's even a future for them. So there are definitely opportunities, but alongside these market changes, we're seeing pretty significant devastation of public sector budgets. So, for example, the city of San Francisco has a budget deficit of about $1 billion a year right now, and the state's budget deficit is $54 billion. And while the federal government has provided short-term relief that is critical, really vital, it's still grappling with a presidential administration that is not looking to help people really in need over the long term, and instead focusing on things like a border wall, which won't house anybody. So our ability to take advantage of opportunity is very much complicated by the availability of resources to do so. And finally, Alexander, you asked how the changes in the workplace and people working from home will have an effect on the city's housing situation and whether it will have a lasting effect. And it looks like the answer to that will be yes, that there will be a lasting effect of the remote workplace changes that we've seen. We may see a dispersal of our workforce away from traditional job centers. We may see a repurposing of a significant amount of commercial properties into residential use. And we might have an opportunity as this country comes to terms not only with the health and safety and COVID responses we're grappling with, but with incredible long-term injustices that are bringing people out into the streets, people of all races, ages, classes. So I think that if we could actually articulate a new kind of country that we want and address some of our greatest long-term plagues, including income inequality, then we could actually remake our cities into something much better.
So viel zum Häusermarkt in San Francisco. Vielen Dank fürs Zuhören. Die nächste Folge Digitale Optimisten kommt wieder in 2 Wochen Montag. Bis dahin bleibt bitte optimistisch.